Hello, everybody, and welcome to Author Content. This is episode 76, I believe. Today, we have a reduced crew. James Williamson is off at Disneyland talking to Donald Duck and hitting on Disney princesses. Meanwhile...
Which now includes Thor, right?
Yes.
You know, Disney
Exactly.
owns Thor, right? And Marvel, so since the new Thor is going to be
since
a
Thor is
lady,
now a woman, Thor
right.
is now a Disney princess. I'm here as always, Morton, and with me I have my trusted co-host Ray Vigilobos.
Hello there.
And so let's talk about superheroes for a second.
Okay. Oh, I am all for it.
I've watched Guardians of the Galaxy.
Did you like it? Because I thought it was awesome.
I liked it. I thought it was quite, I have my own personal hate on for a lot of this Marvel stuff because it's too dumb and too ridiculous, and I don't really understand who the target audience is. Clearly not me, but I quite liked it. And one thing I really liked about it was that it didn't assume that I already knew a lot about the story before I walked in. And I find that is actually, there's an analogy here to web design that I think, a lot of the time when we make things, we get so consumed in what we're doing that we forget the people who are actually looking at it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of, the Marvel movies do it to a degree. Some of the other big franchise movies also do it, where you walk in, and if you haven't already read the book, or if you haven't read every single comic or something like that, there are all these things that happen, and you go, what is this? I'm confused now. The one thing I noticed on this one was I watched the other one, Avengers. And at the very end of Avengers, there's this weird scene where they have a pan in space, and then all of a sudden you see this weird face with a helmet on, like a golden helmet, and this weird, ugly-looking mug. And I remember watching that movie and going, "What is this? Seriously? What is this?" I am just a normal person watching this. I have no idea what that was, and it's so disjointed from the rest of the story. And then when you watch Guardians of the Galaxy, that same character appears. I'm totally spoiling it for someone now, but that same character is there. And after the movie, my wife and I were like, "Wait, is that the same guy?" And we actually have to go online and look it up because we don't know we don't know the backstory. And that was the only thing in the whole movie where I truly felt like they assumed I already knew something. But even that part wasn't important because I could still, it wasn't integral to the story that I knew who this character was, or that I knew that there's probably going to be some sort of tie-in later on. So I quite liked it. The user experience was decent.
I'm really surprised because you're obviously not a big superhero person. But at the same time, when Guardians of the Galaxy was first announced, I was like, Guardians of the what? Like, who are these? I never heard of them. And I am a big comic book fan, so I think they really had to go there this time because it wasn't just the people like you who maybe haven't read any comic books or haven't read much comic books, or they were all in Viking comic books or whatever. They had to do this because a lot of people like me who read comic books didn't really know this group of characters, and so they had to do that, especially for this movie, I think. But the rest of the thing, that bad guy that you see was actually at the end. If you always have to stay after the credits for these movies.
Yeah.
He was actually at the end of the first Avengers, and then he's been carried on in different places. And he's a major bad character that is going to be in, I imagine, the new Avengers movie, although it's mostly about Ultron, which has its own history. But I imagine that Ultron, I don't want to get too deep into it, but Ultron, I believe, here's what I think is going to happen. Yeah. Ultron was created in order probably to combat whatever thing's happening with this bad guy. But yeah, I think you're right. Like they really did a good job of not assuming that the people that came to this movie didn't know anything about the characters. And it was a super enjoyable movie for me, not knowing who these characters were, although I have been doing some pre-reading. So yeah, I think that is true. That does sort of maybe bring up some issues with user experience. Like you really can't assume that people know how they're supposed to navigate or where your stuff is on your website, right?
Yeah, it struck me as a user experience problem when I watched this movie. I didn't realize it before with all the other movies that I was so angry at until I watched this one. I'm like, oh, this works because they're not assuming that I already know what's going on. Funny side note: my only other encounter with Guardians of the Galaxy was actually reading a book by what's his name, Alistair Reynolds. It's a science fiction book called Pushing Ice, where one of the characters is an obsessive fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, and there's like all these references to Guardians of the Galaxy in this book from 2005. So I haven't actually read the real Guardians of the Galaxy. I've only seen references to it in some other random book. That was my completely disjointed reference there. So, Mr. Vigilobos, you've been doing a lot of interesting stuff, I see, on the Twitter and the Facebook and the Google+. So why don't you tell us a bit about what you've been working on?
Yeah, like I was telling you, I don't usually not tell people what I'm working on because I figure they're going to find out anyways, and I'm usually like really excited. There comes, I don't know, like in doing courses, there's like this process that you go through where you're like, okay, I know I have to do something on whatever it is, AngularJS, D3, whatever. And so you're like, okay, what am I going to do? And since you can do anything, it's kind of like overwhelming to figure out exactly which parts of it are you going to attack and what you're going to show and what you're not going to show sometimes. It can be like overwhelming, right? Because you can do anything. So how do you have to like really focus and say, no, I'm not going to do this because users don't really need to know that when I'm trying to show them this. So lately I've been working on a project with responsive design. So I had this idea. You've seen like all those kind of scrolling websites with like parallax scrolling. And whenever I'm like showing my very beginner students how to do whatever, everybody always asks, hey, how do you do that scrolling thing? And I'm like, listen, you guys don't even know HTML. Like you need to learn that before I show you any sort of like scrolling things, right? So everybody wants to really learn that though. And so I decided to do a course on, a lot of sort of modern web, techniques that people are using today for building websites. So this is the sample of what you're going to be building on this course. And you can tell the screen here is whatever photo you have on this first page is full screen, no matter what size you make it. And it adjusts, so it's responsive, obviously. I'm also centering this over here. This layout is kind of centered in the top and bottom of the screen. And if you scroll down, you'll see this little menu right here, which is pretty cool because it's also responsive. You make it bigger, and at a certain point, you go from icons to text, and then when you make it really wide, you go into icons with text at the same time. And this menu will actually dock at the top of the screen, right? And so you can see it scrolls. It's always off screen when you start the website. And then as you scroll down, it'll attach itself to the top. And as you go through different sections, these different little menu items will highlight. So right now I'm in this info section. You can see that it's highlighted, right? And then there's other things like if you click on any of these other buttons, if you click on it, it scrolls down to that section. And here's an example of a tweening effect. So when you click on this attractions, you can see sort of an animation that if I pull up a little bit, you'll see it disappear. And as I get into that area, you'll see that appear. And then if you go into this room section, there's another version of that that's more parallax scrolling-like. So as you go into these different sections, as I scroll the page, I can control the animation based on the scroll that I'm doing right now. So I'm scrolling further down the page, that'll go away, and it'll go to the next item, and it'll go up, and then it'll go away. So just all those different kinds of effects, plus, of course, the typical kind of responsive design. So here, actually, let me go into the, I think the dining page is one. No, it's the info page. So in this page, you can see that the layout is 3 columns, and as you make it thinner, it'll become 2 columns on the bottom and a single column on the top.
Nice.
And the other interesting thing is that if you look at the source code for this thing, and it's sort of hard to see, so let me do inspect element. None of the layout information is in the HTML. So I don't have, like you would see in Bootstrap or Foundation.
Yeah,
I
all the
don't
crazy.
have like the columns, like column, two column, LG, what a three column. All that stuff is done in the CSS, or in this case Sass, and I'm using a bunch of different sort of plugins. So this goes from 3 columns to 2 columns, and then it goes into a single column layout. So here, these 2 items are 2 columns, and then it goes into a single column layout right here.
Nice.
And if you make this extra wide, there's an icon that, like this, image appears right here. So all that stuff is done primarily with Sass and Compass, and for the responsive grid, I'm using something called Suzy, which I've done before, but it had been version like 1.0 of the library, and they've done some updates where they have removed all of the sort of breakpoint things that they had, and they're now asking you to use a different library called Breakpoint. And it really makes it very surprisingly easy. There's a lot of setup at the beginning, but to actually do a lot of these things, it becomes a matter of sort of thinking about what you want to accomplish, as opposed to worrying about which browser prefixes you have to add for this feature and that feature. So that's kind of the cool thing. So it turned out pretty well, and I'm kind of excited. And usually it's at that point, like whenever I get to the point in the class where I build something really cool and I can't wait to show people, that's when I start tweeting about it, and that's how you find out about it, I guess.
So this is going to be a course, right?
Yeah. So that should release. Usually depends on how many other things are going on, but it should be like a month and a half. But it's already actually on GitHub, so you can actually download the source code for this. When you download it from GitHub, you won't see the images, but you can take a look at the structure and look at all the source code. Plus, it's part of another course that I did on workflows. So one of the features of this, thing that I built is that the way that you program it is all automated. So usually when you use something like Sass or less, you have to worry about running some program that pre-processes the file, converts them to CSS. Mm-hmm. And same thing like any sort of JavaScript, combining and minifying those things. All that is built into this course. And when you come to this course, you'll start off with GitHub and download a starter kind of project that has everything already done for you, including the HTML, because this is not an HTML course, so I'm not really talking about that. Right. Other than I will be discussing the fact that there's no layout in any of the HTML. And then after that, you go and start working directly in Sass and taking a look at the different plugins that I'm using for achieving some of these different effects.
That's awesome. And this actually ties in really nicely with a course I have coming out, which is funny because we had absolutely no communication about this whatsoever. Which is
another funny thing, right? Like people probably think that we have some sort of humongous master plan, and sometimes it's like you see something, you kind of run into some sort of, you run into people that are asking for a specific thing, and then you go, really, I need to show people how to do this because everybody's kind of into it and wanting it. So we kind of probably arrived at it from different points of view at the same kind of place. So what is it? Yeah. What is it you're doing?
So my course actually got released a couple of weeks ago. It's called Building a One-Page Style Site with WordPress, and it basically shows it shows how to build the HTML framework of what you're talking about with WordPress, so that you can easily take you basically make a one single page that pulls in content from multiple different locations within your WordPress site. So you can have multiple different pages, and maybe a blog with multiple items and everything. And if people watch that course and then watch the one that you created, they'll be able to take all the styling and all the styling techniques that you're teaching and apply them to the markup that's coming out of my WordPress course, and then make like a conglomerate of the two to make it super fancy. Because my course focuses mainly on how to get the information to display in the order you want without having to put it all in one page at the same time. So how to get it dynamically updatable, how to get the menu to actually pull the right content and target the right elements, and just general design strategies around building the structure of that type of page so that you can put it on the front page of your site without then having to manage the front page in the process. So I think those two courses will actually go really well together.
That's really cool. Like you said, we didn't even plan it, man. some
Oh
sort
yeah,
of like
of course we
psychic,
planned it.
you know. Yeah,
We just planned it in like an ESP kind of way.
that's right. That's right. So
So,
let me see if I can show you a little bit of like how the code works. So here is sort of one of my mix-ins. This is actually a mix-in that takes care of something. But what I wanted to show you here, actually, I need to go to the layout page. What I wanted to show you is actually here on this other layout.scss file. This is a SAS file, and you can see that I have a section here called scene. It's a class in my page, and usually those are essentially what are the different pages in the layout, right? And the cool thing is that the way that you do different layouts is that you tell the scene to behave a certain way, and then when you get to a different sort of media query size, you tell it to do something else. And you can do this in line. So you're saying that in anything that has a class of scene, right, it's going to be at a wide breakpoint. You know, it's going to have this kind of padding. And then at a medium breakpoint, it's going to have a different sort of, you know, style to it. And so that's actually what takes care of, you know, all the layout changes in the different pages. So if I go to, like, I have this module section here, and if we take a look at maybe the very beginning, I think it's called welcome. So you can see here that there's this class called gallery. So here's a good example. And if you remember, at the very top of the page, we had, let me actually show you the page itself so you can see it really quick. So at the very top of this page, I have these 5 images, right? And when you get to a certain size, you probably didn't notice before, but there's only 4 now. So at a certain size, there's only 4 of these. And then when you get to a really small size, they disappear altogether, right? So how do you do that with this whole system? Well, it's really quite simple. And like I said, you end up not thinking about the math involved and also a lot of the coding. All you do is you say, okay, so I have a gallery thing here. And when you have a certain breakpoint, so normally, right, I tell the images not to display. So mobile first, it's not going to display any images, right? However, when you reach a certain point, and I'm calling this as a variable, so this is called small, but it's whatever size I want it to be, right? And I want to include another mix-in. This is kind of a predefined mix-in from Suzy that creates a gallery automatically from any content. So it takes whatever's in these containers and just, you know, splits them into 4 different columns, right? So to say, hey, whenever you've got this breakpoint, create a gallery using whatever's in there, and have every one of those items take one of the columns of 4 columns, right? So display the same thing. And if there is any items that have a class of hide at a small size, that's what this class is, just hide them. And that some of these images, or one of these images has a hide SN class, and it just hides it. And then whenever you reach a certain breakpoint, so a bigger breakpoint, whenever you get to the bigger size, then instead of using 4 items, use 5 items in the gallery. And it's really that easy. You're not really, you know, think about what this would take to actually code. Like you'd have to work a media query. You'd have to create a media query, and usually make those, like I put those at the end, and you know, it's sort of messy. But this whole kind of process makes it a lot easier to get complicated layout things done. And you're thinking really, no, really, you're thinking more about, okay, at this size, what do I want to happen with this thing, this class, this item with this class? So it's really, I mean, to me, it just makes sense. Like I don't have to also worry about, you know, different browser prefixes when I'm doing different things. Like if I'm doing a border radius, say, I don't have to, you know, do anything other than include my border radius mix-in, which is right here. Just say, hey, make the border radius 20%, and SAS and Compass will take care of adding all the browser prefixes that I need automatically. So all I do is just include that command. So it's kind of the beauty of SAS and Compass and all these other things. It's kind of, they attempt to make your life easier. So that's their whole purpose.
That is what they say.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know,
I'm still too obsessive about my code to allow, like, to make that work. But that's just me. I like the long form version.
I think it's getting harder though. Like I know the long form version is cool, but it's getting harder to keep up and maintain with some of the more sort of advanced features and the math involved, like in responsive layouts. Like, you would have to do like the math for the different columns yourself, and then when you wanted to go to a different media query size, then you'd have to worry about the new math for those new columns. And honestly, I don't really want to worry about that. I just let the tool take care of it for me. So.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally legitimate. I don't know. I have an aversion to it. I can't really justify it in any rational way. I need to see what's actually happening, and I need the detail control for some reason. I'm probably just obsessive about it. Speaking of responsive things, I thought I'd show you something neat because James has talked about this previously. The Flexbox, or the Flex display mode that is coming. I did a talk at WordCamp Vancouver about 2 weeks ago about Picture Element and Flexbox. And within that talk, I made some demos of what is possible with Flexbox that allows you to do some really neat stuff, or some stuff that you currently do but is extremely complex for no good reason. Because as you know, when you're working with the original display modes in HTMLs or in CSS, you have a block, which is a block element that goes across the entire screen. And then you have the inline, which is an inline element that goes alongside the rest of the text on the page. And then you have the inline block, which is basically an inline element that has the block attached to it, so you can add extra padding and make it vertically aligned and stuff like that. But if you want to do anything fancy, like let's say make a gallery of 4 images that each are clickable and then make them all expand and contract, you have to apply JavaScript or something to get it to work, because of what you were talking about. All this math that needs to happen becomes really complex until you have Flexbox. So for my presentation, I made a bunch of simple examples of what is possible. And this always has to be prefaced with, Flexbox is not properly supported by all browsers, and there's some slight disagreement about the markup. So you have to do a lot of prefixing, and you have to make proper fallbacks. Or what I do is I build everything in progressive enhancement mode, meaning I build it out as if Flexbox didn't exist first, and then I add Flexbox on, because what happens is if Flexbox is not supported by the browser, it'll simply be ignored, and then it'll just fall back to whatever you built first. So this is a standard layout, right? This is just 4 images, and each of these images is its own link, and there's a title on each image. And what I want to happen is, for when I hover over an image, I want that image to take up twice as much space as it currently does, and then everything else has to shrink in the process, which sounds simple, but in old school ways of doing things is really hard. But with Flexbox, it just works. So the Flexbox actually understands the widths involved and shrinks down everything else. Basically what's happening is the image I hover over gets an attribute of 2, where everything else has the attribute of 1. And then Flexbox actually understands that, oh, then I need to scale all the other elements down to fit. And what's really neat about it is when you do this, the anchor element that's attached to this image also expands with it, meaning I don't lose the anchor element. Like you must have experienced this, but if you try to build something like this, then the anchor element stays the same size as it was before. So if you hover your mouse outside of where the original frame was, then you lose it, and then it collapses on itself. But this just works, and it's so simple. It's like 2 lines of CSS. There are just 2 declarations to get this layout to actually work properly. And it's very, very intuitive. And like I said, it breaks down nicely for older browsers.
Yeah, the cool thing is that it really makes sense. Like Flexbox is the way that alignment should have worked in HTML. So yeah, it's definitely awesome. The only thing is that you do have to worry about that browser support and also the prefixes, which is the thing that the way that I'm doing the code makes simpler for you. So for example, to get that big photo to align the content automatically to the top and bottom of my page, here's my 3 lines of code, and that translates into something. Let me show you what it actually
Yeah,
creates.
that's vertically and horizontally centers it, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it actually when it writes the code for you, it does it automatically, right? But then it also automatically will insert all the different Flexbox, you know, prefixes for you,
Yeah.
which should be like all this stuff over here, right? But it does that for you. Like you don't even have to think about how to actually accomplish that. You just think of what you want to do, and then you type the lines of code that say, hey, center this, align this, justify this, and it'll take care of all that stuff for you. So it makes it like really fun to actually do things with. So
it's really neat. I have another demo. I have let's see.
Sure.
This is
Cool.
This is a typical menu layout. So if you've ever tried to build these menus, they're kind of a pain because there's two menus here, right? There's the regular menu here on the left, and then there's the social menu on the right. And what you need to happen is if you scale this, then the menu on the left needs to you have to allow it space, but then something has to happen to the menu on the right when you get to a small enough screen. And when you do this with floats, or if you do it with display inline and then have each item a block element, then you have to clear the container around it so that when the social menu falls down, it doesn't break the container in the process. But with Flexbox, it just automatically aligns properly, and you don't actually have to think about what you're doing at all. You just tell it you tell the line to wrap, and then it just wraps naturally when necessary. And it also allows you to just tell it, align these things so that basically you justify the two elements, because these are two items. One item is the first unordered list, the second item is the other one, and Flexbox puts a natural line in between them and says, okay, I'll just share the space between the two of you and maximize it. So you get these really simple layout modes of something that used to be extremely complex, and you can add this to a much larger layout, and then you get something like this, which is the infamous what is it called? Why can I never remember this? Holy Grail layout, right? The Holy Grail layout, which has which has three equal height columns. It has a footer that sticks to the bottom. It has a header that sticks to the top. And it scales properly as you scale it down. And what you're seeing here is multiple different elements that have flex attached to them. So the entire frame has flex attached to it and is aligned vertically, so that we have basically three elements. You have the header, you have the main section, and you have the footer. And that's what makes it so that no matter how I scale this, the footer will always stick to the bottom. Then you have another flex element inside the menu that contains the two menus. Then you have within that, each of the menus is using flex 2 to align the items. Then in the main section, you have a flex element that aligns these three elements. And then finally in the footer, you have the same thing. Now what gets really neat here is that with Flexbox, you can also change the order of your content only in the display. So without changing the markup, you can change the order. So for example, if I were to say, I want this second sidebar to appear on the left-hand side, all I need to do is go into the element here, and where it says, let's see, I need to find sidebar 2. If I just declare order, and in this case I have to say -1 because everything else is, everything else is 0 already. If I just say order -1, then the second sidebar moves to the left-hand side. It becomes the first element. So I'm actually changing the display of the order of the content without changing the markup in the process. And you can see when you see this, how you could actually ship a site where you could allow the user who visits to decide where the different elements are going to be positioned by simply triggering or toggling style classes on and off, for instance. Or you could ship a different layouts. So you say you can do this in left and right column layout, or in a right and left column layout, or whatever you want, and it would simply be adding or subtracting one single class that would then reorder these items into the structure you want without ever touching the HTML at all. And this kind of stuff, when you see this, and if you've ever tried to do it, this is the kind of stuff that really makes you angry about how CSS has been built out. Because you see it and you go, Why wasn't it like this the
That should
whole
be easy to
time?
build. This should be a no-brainer. Oh, this is going to be easy. Yeah, and you also have to worry about the difference between like older IE browsers, like the way that they do the math on the columns, on
Yeah.
floats and stuff, and then the new way. Yeah, let me show you the way that I'm doing it in my layout because I have something kind of similar, and it's the navigation. I mean, it's a little doesn't have as many items as yours, but essentially this navigation brand right here is one column and then
Mhm.
these other ones are a different column. So when you go small and they go into icons, these kind of remain here, although I could have aligned them to the right. So the way that I do that in code, I'll show you, is pretty simple. This is actually, the part that does this is called SUSY. It's the SUSY framework that allows
Yeah.
you to do this. So all you do is, whenever you have an element that you want to align within a sort of area on the page, right? You include this container, right? This is the container tag. The
Mhm.
container tag is defined earlier on in another section in this variables, right? And this container is defined as 60 ems right here. And my whole grid is defined as a 12-column grid with quarter gutters, and the gutters go inside. But when you're laying the navigation out, all you have to do is just say, hey, I want to include the default container, which if you want to, you can also change right here. So you can say, well, I like the default container, however, I want it to be 60% of the current container, and it'll do that automatically for you. Or you can say, I really like the default container, but I want there to be less or more space between the columns, or I want to use a 24-column grid instead of the regular grid, et cetera, et cetera. Is that flexible? And then the other only two things that I do is I have essentially the brand, right, which is the branding part with the name of the hotel. And what I do there is I just say, I want this to take up 4 of the 12 columns, of the default 12 columns.
Right.
And then later on, for my unordered list, which is my icons or my navigation area on the right, is all I have to do is just say, I want to take this unordered list and just make it fit within, 8 columns of the 12-column grid, starting at the 4th position. And I didn't even have to do this part right here because by default my grid is set to be 12 columns.
Right.
So that's that. It's that easy. And then I can add media breakpoints so that whenever the width of the screen gets to be a certain size, my branding changes the font so that it's smaller, and also so that part of it doesn't display. So if you noticed in my layout, let me show you. Back to my layout. Whenever it gets kind of small, this has an extra word in it. So when it gets bigger, you can see that it's 2 words, and then when it gets small, just to make it fit on a very tiny mobile device, I just have that extra word have a class that hides that. So I just tell it to not display it. And then the same thing's happening with the text. I actually tell it not to display. So that happens in a different place. But it's really exactly kind of like what you're saying. The advantage to using this is that it's a little more compatible with older browsers because it's not using Flexbox at all. It's using just regular floats, so it will be a little more backwards compatible with older stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, I actually tried to use Flexbox in production and shippable product, but I do it in a very conservative way so that I added as a progressive enhancement, meaning I build it to work in the way I want in older browsers first, and then I add Flexbox to it. Now, there's an important component to that, and that is I try to apply the progressive enhancement philosophy that the site doesn't necessarily have to look the same in all browsers. And I think that's a really important thing to embrace, especially if you're, the only way that Flexbox, which is probably the most revolutionary thing that's happening in CSS right now, the only way that's going to be properly implemented in all the browsers is if we start using them. And if we're holding back and we prevent ourselves from using it because we're afraid that it'll break something, then it'll take much longer for it to become a standard. And this is something we really need because it allows us to do things that previously were extremely complicated. And it does it in a really clean and simple way that doesn't have a lot of crazy stuff going on. So instead of saying, I want to do this, but it won't look the same in IE8, say, I'm going to make it look good in IE8, and then for browsers that have support for Flexbox, I'm going to make it look better. right? So I can't show you because I'm working on a client project right now, which does heavily utilizes Flexbox in making a very specific kind of layout that just can't be done with regular floats and clears. But when it falls back to an older browser, it has a different experience that works just as well. It just doesn't have that same really intense Flexi kind of experience. But then again, the Flexi experience doesn't necessarily it only makes sense on a computer that would have a more modern browser in it, because it also adds other functionality to it. It assumes a much bigger screen. It assumes other kind of behaviors that a user would do. So it's not as much a mandatory element as a really nice element if you're on a larger browser or a newer browser. So I think, if you're watching this and you haven't taken a look at Flexbox before, it's something you should really do and try to figure out how to use it in your projects in a progressive enhancement kind of way to help us move the browsers forward. It's just like HTML5, right? For the longest time, people didn't want to use the HTML5 elements because they were worried about the browsers not supporting it. And then at some point, someone just said, you know what? If we're not using it, the browsers will never support it. So let's just start doing it now and then force them to actually do it. And there's one more little thing there. With picture element and all this other cool stuff, there's a JavaScript shim that you can use. There is a JavaScript shim for Flexbox. However, that JavaScript shim uses the previous markup for Flexbox that's no longer valid. So if you come across it, I believe it's called Flexi.js or something like that. It actually says on the page that this is not supporting the current markup. So don't try to use that to fall back, because you'll end up writing code that doesn't validate to anything anymore.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to learn how to use cutting-edge stuff like this, and then at the same time just understand where it's not going to be realistic on on some projects. It's not going to be the way that you do things for everything. But I remember when I became a manager, for a long time, I wasn't doing things like in Photoshop anymore. And so when I went back to a job where I had to use Photoshop, I was like 2 versions behind, and it was a real struggle for me to get back up to speed on it. And the same thing happened to me with like CSS3. I was one of those people that, no, we have to support like IE6, IE7, so I don't really want to use any of that. A couple of years later, it was such a huge thing that everybody else was using it. And so I really needed to know how to work with it, and I felt, again, a little bit behind it that I had to catch up. So I think tools like SAS are going to make you be able to use some of that stuff now in production environments, and also help you understand how, what the issues are going to be, and how you're going to need to be testing on older browsers and make sure that your stuff is compatible with whatever lower bar you have set for support for your projects. But it's really, you need to know how to do it, because your clients are going to ask for it. They're going to see some sort of site with cool scrolling features, and they're going to go, I want that on my website. And you need to be the person that says, yes, I can give you that, but I've done this before, and let me show you some of the issues. Maybe mobile support will not be as good as you're thinking it's going to be. Or this is not going to work on some older browsers. Is that okay with you? And it might be. I mean, it might be that when somebody expects to have the latest features.
Yeah, on the topic of older browsers, news came out this week that Microsoft is end of lifing Internet Explorer 8 and 9 by 2016?
Yeah, January 2016. Yeah.
Yeah,
really
and
big news. I think we all need to have you and I need to have a party somewhere in between Vancouver and Florida.
Yeah,
to celebrate.
Right in the middle. I believe there's nothing there.
Yeah.
This is for people who've been talking to Microsoft for a long time, like me. This is not surprising at all. And there's a lot of there's a lot of history that goes into why Internet Explorer is so prevalent, why it's so hard to get it updated, and so on. But what I find interesting about this news release that came out from them is they're saying that they're now going to move to a different update model for Internet Explorer specifically, so that Internet Explorer becomes more like Chrome and Firefox, and that when a new version comes out, it automatically updates immediately, rather than what was happening before, which was you usually had to wait for another operating system to come out for them to catch up. Now, there are actual, there are structural reasons why things are the way they are with Internet Explorer. And it comes as a bit of a surprise to people often when they realize why this is happening. Internet Explorer is the file browser in Windows. So when you go and open a file in Windows, you're looking at Internet Explorer. In fact, the bar on the bottom of your screen, if it ever goes away, if like your computer stops working, and you go Control-Alt-Delete and you go to this task manager and write in Explorer and just hit Enter, then you're booting up Explorer again, and that's actually the same application that you use to surf the internet. And there are historical reasons why it's like that, but knowing that, you would also understand why Microsoft can't simply just ship a new version all the time, because the new version also impacts the entire operating system. It would
break computers, yeah.
Yeah, it's not just the browser.
All of a sudden, airports wouldn't be able to fly their planes,
And it's one of those
World War III, cats sleeping with dogs, all that stuff,
It would be a disaster of enormous magnitude. And what's happening now is they've realized
Y2K all over again.
They've realized that that decision might not have been the best one, and they're working on a way of making it possible to do these updates without crashing the entire world in the process, which is great. And I think that what we're going to see moving forward, so 2015, 2016, as these new versions of Windows roll out, there will be a very dramatic shift both from Microsoft and also in how people start building things. Because you can imagine, there will be a point in time when the majority of internet users will actually be running computers that are up to date, where browsers are up to date, even if they're running a Windows computer. And at that point, all these discussions we keep having about backwards compatibility and everything become kind of irrelevant. And it's a clear paradigm shift, because you go from we need to care about older browsers to this no longer matters to us. Now, of course, there are issues with Microsoft saying they're ending life, they're basically end-of-lifing software, meaning they're no longer going to supply security patches and things like that. So they end-of-life was a Windows XP a couple of months ago, and it basically means, from now on, Windows XP is basically free season. Any hacker can just figure out how to do it, and Microsoft's not going to ship
Which is actually if you think about it, it's a great way of encouraging the enterprise to upgrade. It's kind of like the way of making them do that, right?
Except for the reason why people still use use XP, which is that they have applications built specifically to work in IE6, and they're stuck with them. And those insignificant businesses that use that are the banking sector,
the libraries,
airline booking systems in the entire world, and all ATM machines. So, trivial nonsense, things no one uses, like airline booking systems, banks.
Who uses ATM machines anymore, really, though?
So it's it's harder than you think, and it's funny when you talk to the the IE crew, because they're stuck in this horrible place where they go, we want to get rid of this. For that to happen, someone has to invest like $30 billion to upgrade an enormous amount of machines all over the world, and get people rewrite software to get these things to work.
Which I imagine should be fine with Microsoft. Fine if they have to buy new operating systems.
But it's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. So even though even though XP has been end-of-lifed, all these banks and the airline sector and all these other people are paying Microsoft to keep updating it, because they simply cannot afford to upgrade, which is a really unfortunate situation, but that's actually where we are. And so the story is much bigger than just I hate this browser. There's all these geopolitical issues involved and all these really complex technological things, and there's financial side to it. There are all these other things that come into play. And that's why I'm saying when they say they're going to kill support for these browsers, there's still a large span of time between that happening and us living in a world where those browsers no longer exist, because we have to wait for everyone to basically throw out their old computers and upgrade to a new operating system, and then it'll come on board.
Yeah, by the time I can like use Flexbox for my real work, I'll be like collecting Social Security.
No, it's next year.
It'll be like more.
No, it'll be next year. Because someone's going to build a proper JavaScript shim for it, and then you won't have an issue with it anymore. In fact, you should be using it in your real work today. You just have to add it as a progressive enhancement. I sure mean that.
I just showed you.
Like I said, I'm shipping a major project. I'm shipping a major project for a real client that is entirely reliant on Flexbox, that has nice fallbacks, but seriously, it has to be on the web today, because all the browsers, they sit there and they monitor what's on the web, and they say, how many times do I see Flex? And if they only see like half of 1%, they're going to be like, no one's using this, we'll wait. But if they all of a sudden see 20%, and they go, wait, this doesn't work properly, the browser does it, that's embarrassing.
I think the magic number is like 1%, so it's going to be a while, I think. But you're right, we should be using it, because your job at some point will depend on it. If people bring cool experiences that cannot be done any other way, your clients are going to want it, and they're going to ask you for it. And if you don't know how to use it, you're going to be at a disadvantage and not be able to get some jobs that some firms are going to be able to get. So you need to master a lot of these cutting-edge tools, or at least get some experience with them.
And if you're watching this and you're like, I want to see all this cool stuff you're talking about, I've shared the link to the Ray's GitHub repo and to my Flexbox presentation and everything in the Showcase app in this video. So if you go to Google Plus and you go watch the video there, you'll see all the links appear, and you can go check them out, because this is awesome stuff.
And not to do like a shameful plugin, but I'm going to be next month where I'll be showing Angular project as well as the responsive part of the project that I just showed you. How you can do
you
columns
dropped
easily.
out. You dropped out right when you said the name of the conference.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Web Unleashed 2014 in Toronto. I'm doing 2 sessions, and one of them is going to be on the responsive. The responsive part of what I just showed you, not necessarily the animations, but just the responsive part. And then the month after that, in November, I will be at another conference in Halifax. I don't know why I'm Canada all of a sudden. I'll have to buy like a shirt with the maple leaf. But then I'll be at another conference, and I'll be showing more of the animation tweens as well as the responsive stuff. So.
You have to come to Canada, because Canada is awesome.
It is awesome, except for the Slurpees. I'm still miffed with the Slurpees.
The Slurpees?
The Slurpees at the 7-Elevens aren't carbonated, which they taste really different, and it drives you nuts if you're like an American.
I'm sorry. The Slurpees aren't carbonated.
In Canada, yes.
That's not a first world problem. That is a 0th world problem, meaning it doesn't exist as a problem.
It's a big problem for me, man.
Carbonated Slurpees? Where do I get these? I need to try that next time I'm down in Crazy Town.
Yeah, man. Any place in America.
Wow.
They're awesome.
Insane.
They're so much better. You're gonna thank me. Then you're gonna go back into Canada. You're gonna want to move back here. You're like, what? These uncarbonated ones are awful.
So before I let you go, I saw that you posted something about this D3 too, right? You have a new course on that?
Yeah, so that one actually just released in the library. It's D3 is a library that allows you to do data-driven graphics using JavaScript. And the beautiful thing about D3 is that it makes parsing any sort of data format trivial. It will accept things in JSON as a CSV file. It'll even accept like an HTML document, and it'll parse it into something that you can very easily with JavaScript get access to any of the elements within the layout. And once you have that, then you can make all kinds of SVG visualizations that will work on any sort of browser, and it's pretty awesome. So it's a cool course to check out.
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking I should probably start doing that. I have these ideas of visualizing things, and I really need to figure out how to do it properly.
Yeah, D3 makes it so simple. I mean, I saw this a couple years at the Fluent conference, and once you see what it can do, I mean, it's amazing. So you should definitely check that one out. And it's pretty easy to learn. I mean, you do have to know how SVG works, but and I do go through that on the course. But once you understand that, then actually using the library is pretty simple. I don't know. Can you hear the audio? Probably not, right?
But I'm sharing up the link to this course as well, so people can check it out.
Yeah, so you can see, really cool kind of animations with data, and it's a pretty simple code when you get down to it. If you know JavaScript, it'll be pretty easy for you to pick up. But you just have to understand like a little bit of SVG and how those graphics work. So it has a jQuery-like selection language that allows you to get to any container and then very easily pass the data. So you can see here where I'm passing data, and I'm here I'm generating some random data for graphing something, right? Yeah, it's really awesome. And if you're into JavaScript, it's very easy to learn how to work with this stuff.
Yeah, I think it can use this to make art. That's what I want to do. I have an idea for a rather crazy art project that would be like co-generated art. And I think I might be able to use it.
You will love this. You will love this library. It's really amazing and super easy to use.
Yeah, so it's on my playlist.
I thank you for adding me to your playlist. I'm very honored. I use your playlist quite a bit. I mean, holy cow. I have to tell you this more, not to like try to make you feel like awesome, but your stuff is really good. So I'm, I have things on my playlist from you, and I routinely check your courses, especially like I always want to try to do like plugins and that kind of stuff. So we're lucky to have you, man.
Oh, that's nice to hear from you. It means a lot. Enough with the self-promotion.
Yes.
Now, I'm actually, as you can see, in the booth recording, and I have to get back to it because I have a lot of crap I need to have out before the end of the day. So I think we are going to call this as full-time. If you're watching this show and you want to learn more about what we're doing, you can contact us on Twitter, or you can check out our courses on lynda.com. This show goes
Follow me on Twitter. I always babble about everything that I'm doing, just because at a certain point I just get excited about it. I'm like, wow, look at this really cool thing.
See, Ray and I are opposite. I never talk about anything until it comes out. Ray talks about all the stuff he does before it gets released. So if you follow us both, you'll get two opposite sides of the same coin. Author content is on Google+, where you can follow us. That's also where you'll get the link to the next episode. Author content is on YouTube, where you can watch everything back to about the beginning of the year. The rest of it you'll find somewhere else. Author content is on iTunes if you want to just listen and not see what we're talking about. And we have a website called authorcontent.com, where you get show notes and snarky comments about what's going on. And like I said earlier, all the links to everything we've been talking about are in this video on Google+, in the Showcase app. So you can simply go watch the video on Google+, click on the links, and you'll go directly to what we've been talking about. That is full-time for Author Content. I would like to thank my co-host, Ray Vigilovos, for joining me for the chat. We will be back next week, although I might be on a plane. I know I keep saying that, and it's actually true. I'm going to Montreal to talk at WordCamp Montreal, and I don't know exactly where I am during the time. So if I'm available, Author Content will go on the air.
My wife might be having a baby, because any day now,
oh yes,
new baby will drop. I might be.
Ray's raising an army
in labor. Yes, somebody's got to do it.
So we will possibly be on the air next week. If not, we will be on the air the week after that with new stuff. And we have exciting things coming up for the fall. We're booking ahead. I had a meeting with someone yesterday that has something really cool that Ray will be super excited about that I'm not going to tell him what is until later.
Don't worry, as soon as he tells me, I'll go ahead and blab on it.
Yeah, you will totally blab on this, and it's super awesome. So
if it involves superheroes, I'm all over it.
It's something you'll like even more than superheroes.
Must be Minecraft then.
So, I'm not going to say anything more, but it's really cool. So anyway, that is full time for other content. Thank you all for watching. We will be back here again either next week or the week after. Until then, same bad time, same bad channel.